One of the wildest and most unexpected days of my life was the day my stepson came into my room as I was getting dressed. Since it was so thrilling, allow me to take you back to the beginning. I stood in front of the mirror, thinking deeply as I repositioned the collar of my shirt because the home was eerily quiet, so I had to fight off the encroaching loneliness that seemed to plague me while my wife, Daisy, was gone on yet another business trip. These vacant walls had actually become the norm for her infrequent visits at home, which were followed by extended periods of absence. I attempted to persuade myself that her ambition for her work was noble, but in reality, it left me Daisy's son Lucas had just returned from college and was feeling more like a ghost in my own house. He carried himself with a quiet confidence at the age of 21, and he was kind, considerate, and surprisingly helpful around the house. He was charming and fascinating, and his presence was a pleasant diversion in an otherwise dull home, but I started to notice things like his quick glances and lingering smiles. When we passed each other in the corridor, my hand would brush across mine, but I convinced myself it was nothing, after all, I was a kid, and he was my stepson, so my imagination was playing tricks. That afternoon, a married man saw golden light streaking throughout the room as sunlight filtered through the slats. After completing my tasks, I had made the decision to change into something cozier, so I stood in front of my undershirt, clung to my torso as I stared at my reflection in the full-length mirror, and for a brief minute, I let myself to question whether I still looked attractive and fit, because it had been years since I felt Daisy had been really distracted by her phone for a long time. I groped for a lightweight robe draped over her friend's never-ending projects, which always seemed to take precedence over me. I slid my undershirt over, feeling the cool cloth on my fingers over the chair by the bed. My heart leaped, and I was shocked by the abrupt creak of the door. Grabbed the robe to my chest out of instinct while turning around while Lucas was standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with surprise, his face changing from, "I'm really sorry, but I was shocked by something I couldn't quite place. I thought you were downstairs, but I didn't realize you were there, so I stumbled and stepped back. As I tried to find my voice, the ensuing quiet was so loud that my heart was pounding in my ears. I didn't hear you enter, but I managed, even though my cheeks burned with shame. I didn't mean to interrupt him, but he paused, his eyes darting between my face and the robe I was holding tightly. "I'll go," he replied in a tight yet quiet voice, but I interrupted him before he could depart. He hesitated and turned around as the word "wait" hung in the air, laden with unsaid tension. "Yes?" he asked, his voice just above a whisper, and I hesitated. My mind was racing, and I wasn't sure why I had stopped him. Perhaps it was loneliness. Tearing at my chest, or the way he brought a warmth to the room that I hadn't experienced in years later, I said, "It's okay," my voice finally steadying. "You don't have to leave now." Was taken aback, and he nodded slowly as he re-entered the room. "Didn't intend to offend you," he added in a genuine tone. "And you didn't." I said with my heart continued to race, and for a little while, neither of us expected anyone. As we conversed, the atmosphere between us was packed with intense attentiveness that was both thrilling and frightening. I could feel his eyes following me, and even though I was embarrassed, I couldn't force myself to look away, he said, his brow furrowed with assurance. "Yes," I answered hastily, attempting to laugh nervously. It's not a huge thing, but it was significant, or at least it seemed so based on the way he was staring at me. His eyes caused my skin to tingle in a way I had never felt before. He responded, "I should probably go," as if time had stopped, and the only thing that mattered was the distance between us. I answered, surprisingly, even though he didn't make any attempt to depart. His frown softened as I said, "It's nice to have company." "Okay," he replied, just leaning, the corners of his mouth rising into a tiny smile. "If you're certain," I nodded, releasing my hold on the robe on the doorframe. We stood there in silence for a few seconds, I'm sure, feeling the weight of the unspoken. His eyes met mine, and as we stretched apart, a surge of heat swept across my cheeks. His eyes were steady and unyielding, but there was something in them that made me gasp. Daniel replied in a quiet voice, and my heart was thumping in my chest. Breaking the stillness. "Have you changed recently? Are you all right?" The inquiry took me by surprise, so I paused before responding. "I'm fine," even though the words were hollow. "Simply exhausted, so I suppose you don't need to act that way." His tone was forceful yet gentle. His honesty deterred me, and for a little period I felt the barriers I had put up. "I can tell something has been bothering you." Around me started to fall apart, and nothing I said at last, though my voice faltered. "Just life." He took a step towards me, his eyes never leaving mine, and he said, "You don't have to go through it alone. I'm here." And I got a lump in my stomach when I heard how vulnerable he was. I responded, my voice barely above a whisper, "Thank you." And he nodded his eyes. I only watched him hover in the doorway, seeking mine whenever he said. There was a tense vibe in the room as his palm brushed the frame, perhaps unwilling to go. My heart raced as I pulled the robe more over me, despite the fabric seeming heavy, because of the tension that seemed to pulse between us. While restricting Lucas, I spoke in a barely audible voice, and he stopped spinning. Returning to me, his tone soft, his features enigmatic. "Yes, I did ask." I answered, "You don't have to go," yet his eyes showed a glimpse of something deeper. I was surprised by the remarks. I mean, it's okay if you want to stay and chat for a little while, but he didn't. In response, his gaze locked with mine, seeking as though to figure out what. He moved more slowly into the room, allowing the door to click shut. I wasn't sure whether it was him, but the sound behind him made me shudder. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice out of fear or something else. Low and KU, since I don't want to cause you any discomfort, and I'm not, responded promptly, but my cheeks reddened at the deception. I was anything but comfortable, but my heart was pounding, my hands were shaking a little, and my mind was a flurry of uncertainty and want, but I didn't want him to go just yet. As if testing the waters, he paused a few paces before moving slowly and deliberately across the room. His eyes darted from where I sat to the robe that was securely wrapped around me, then back to my face, as if quieter lately, he murmured gently, and I laughed nervously. I said, "It's nothing serious, just fidgeting with the edge of the robe." "Life has a way of doing that to you." I assumed that loneliness caused his brows to wrinkle, and a flash of worry to cross his features. He reiterated, "I'm lonely, but you're married, and Daisy is always busy." I spoke more abruptly than I meant to, always working somewhere. Otherwise, I was taken aback by the harshness in my voice and quickly turned my head away. I apologize for whispering that, but I'm ashamed by my own outburst. "Fair to you, you don't need to say sorry," he remarked in a hard but gentle tone. "Daniel, you deserve to be noticed and valued because of the honesty of what he said." Snatched my breath away, and when I looked up at him, my chest constricted as we locked eyes. It was tough to stare into his eyes because of something unguarded and raw there. I confessed my voice, and I'm not even sure I remember how it felt. The confession hovered between us, vulnerable, just above a whisper. And weighty, but for once I didn't regret speaking the truth, and I didn't regret want to conceal it. "You're significant," he murmured quietly, drawing nearer. My breath froze in my throat because I don't think you understand how much you mean to me. The passion in his gaze and the tenderness in his voice made his words sink in. Overpowering, I could feel the barriers I had put up around myself gradually eroding. "Thank you. You have no idea how much it means to me," he replied, his voice shaking. Then his palm delicately brushed mine, making brief but hardly noticeable touch. Then a touch. But I couldn't resist the shock it gave me as I glanced down at our hands, his fingers lingering just inches away from me, and experienced a rush of something I couldn't identify as Daniel. He continued in a quiet, hesitating voice. I don't want to go too far, but the room appeared to close in on us, and the air became thick with unsaid words. I care about you so much. And feelings, my pulse thumping, my heart hammering in my chest as I attempted to Lucas, I started to comprehend what he was saying, but my voice trailed off. I mean, I didn't sure how to react to the emotional storm raging inside of me, so he went on with his, I know that you've always been so kind and nice to me, even with the vulnerability in his eyes. Is complex, but I can't deny how I feel. I stared at him, my thoughts racing, and his words were like although they were perilous, they provided a lifeline that helped me escape the depths of my own loneliness and self-doubt, luring me to go too far, from which I doubted I could ever return. And I'm at a loss for words, so I eventually confessed He completed this for me in a little voice that was hardly audible above a whisper. I understand that Rye's smile is pulling at the corner of his lips, but that doesn't make it any less. As the distance between us shrank to nearly nothing, I felt my breath catch as he took another step closer. Nothing happened, but his hand extended once again and rested softly on my shoulder. You don't have to feel alone, since the warmth of his touch permeated the robe's fabric and sent a chill down my spine. Whispered quietly, his eyes unblinking, and I swallowed. Lucas, I started, but before I could, his words reverberated in my head, hardening my throat. I tilted my face up to meet his as his fingers touched my cheek, and the touch was almost kind, reluctant, as if he was expecting me to back down, but I was unable to. So I ended up leaning into him with my heart racing. As we met eyes, he whispered in a low voice, "Tell me to stop." Packed with a subdued intensity, I was about to reply when you asked me to simply speak the word. But after we exchanged words, the tension between us became intolerable, like a magnetic pole that I couldn't help but lean in his warm breath against my skin gently, and I could feel When his lips finally touched mine, his determination entirely collapsed. At first they were cautious and delicate, nearly inquisitive kiss, but as I answered and let myself to be absorbed in the minute the hesitancy subsided, his hands moved to my waist, drawing me in, and I felt the robe slide off my shoulders a little. Every touch made every nerve in my body twitch. The kiss became more urgent, sending a shock of energy through me, became frantic, and I sensed that I was losing control and caving in to the fervor that this wasn't just a kiss that had been boiling beneath the surface for too long. It was a means of escape, a release, and a return to life, and as his hands moved over I knew there was no going back as his lips touched mine. Yet the most bizarre aspect was that this was just the start. His hands discovered the robe's edge as it draped loosely over His fingers grazed the smooth fabric on my shoulders before descending to the bend of my waist. His contact made me shudder, since I could feel his palms heat through the thin linen. A sense of longing that I hadn't experienced in a long time seemed to burn through every inch of me. "Years, Daniel." His voice was full of emotion as he whispered against my lips. But it wasn't simply want, but it was something more profound that left me gasping for air, and his eyes were fixed on mine as I shook and drew back a little, my chest heaving as I attempted to settle myself. Searching and imploring as though for authorization to go, the gravity of the situation was overwhelming, yet I couldn't bring myself to leave the outer world alone. I felt isolated and unimportant in this room, and all I could think about was him. Feeling his warmth and the way his eyes made me feel alone, I mumbled my questions to him. Voice was hardly audible, Yet I remained motionless and kept my hands resting beneath my fingertips, feeling his heart's steady beat on his chest, which matched my own pounding pulse, a beat that for some reason I couldn't describe seemed to unite us. "You don't need to do anything." Lucas responded, "You don't want to," in a hushed voice that was full of intensity. Made my heart hurt, and all I want is for you to know how much you mean to me. I felt tears prickle the corners of my eyes as his words cut through the whirlpool of ideas racing through my head. When was the last time I felt truly seen? And when was the last time someone spoke to me in this way? "Someone I have no idea what I'm doing," I said, my voice shaking as I gazed. "You don't have to know him, but I'm not sure how I feel about all of this." "We can sort it out," he said, sweeping a lock of hair away from my face. "One step at a time, going out together." The earnestness in his voice, the kindness in his touch was too much, and I felt my barriers entirely collapse. Had formed around me, breaking under the pressure of his stare. I cautiously leaned in and rested my forehead against his. I muttered, "I'm scared," against his as I closed my eyes. He confessed that his breath felt warm against my skin before I could stop them from me either. However, I repeated the term hanging because I don't want fear to stop us from doing this. I couldn't help but be drawn to him, even though I had no idea what it meant or what it would lead to. We were drawn closer together by an unstoppable force that felt like gravity when he kissed me once more, but this time he raised his hands to my lips more slowly and deliberately. I moved the robe slowly down my arms and shoulders till it tugged at my feet. Gasped quietly as the room's chilly air contrasted with the warmth of his touch. As he led me backward, his lips never left mine, and before I knew it, I was perched on the edge of the bed with my heart. He knelt in front of me, his hands lightly resting on my chest as it pounded. Knees, as his gaze swept over my. "Are you sure?" he said in a firm voice, although I hesitated only a second before nodding, my chest tightening with a faint vulnerability. "Yes, I did say that the word is hardly audible beyond a whisper, and I'm confident that the tension between us thickened as he leaned in, and my hands ended up tangled in his hair. Silken threads as I leaned back and allowed myself to lose myself in the present. Every kiss and touch sent chills down my spine, kindling a fire inside of me that I was unable to ignore Lucas, so I muttered his name as if in prayer. Reacting with a low hum, the feeling was thrilling, combining kindness, and I was out of breath from the urgency, but as soon as he touched me, I relaxed and felt the tension in my body dissipate. Vanished as I fully gave myself up to the moment, leaving no space for uncertainty or fear. Only the intense need to feel, to connect and let go of all that has been preventing me from moving forward for so long. "You're amazing," he whispered in a quiet voice. Struck with wonder at the sincerity of his tone, gave me a warm rush and made my eyes water once more. How could I have gone so long without? You give me a sense of life when I hear things like that without experiencing this. Admitted, my voice shaking with emotion that I can't even begin to describe. "You don't have to," he said, kissing me and putting his hands over my face. Time appeared to stop as we lost ourselves in each other, and I felt it strongly too. The outer world is fading into obscurity. Every kiss, every touch, and every muttered phrase seemed like a discovery that served as a reminder of the significance of genuinely connecting with someone, and as the moment went on, I became aware that I didn't want it to end. I said, "I don't want to lose this," in a barely audible voice. He said, "I don't want to lose you, you won't," with a steady stare. His words were a comforting balm to my soul, and I'm determined not to go anywhere. I clung to him, allowing his presence to fill the voids in my life because I had been suffering from loneliness for so long. Heart, and I felt complete for the first time in years. As the evening went on, the hour boundaries became hazy, and I stopped giving a damn about right and wrong. All that mattered was how he made me feel, as though he brought back memories of my identity and the meaning of life. And I realized then that there was no going back. "You're trembling," he added. I nodded as his eyes met mine and his thumb lightly brushed my jawline. I couldn't tell the truth because I wasn't sure if I was shaking from anxiety or I felt completely exposed in a manner I hadn't felt before, whether it was anticipation or something else entirely. He said in a whisper, "It's okay. I let myself be in years. We can take our time. I'm not going to rush it." Gentle, it made my chest hurt. Wherever he spoke, something in his genuine tone calmed the whirlwind of feelings that had been I shakily breathed, sinking into his touch as I allowed myself to be swirled inside. It was both thrilling and terrible to allow myself to believe him. Give up the barriers I've been erecting around my heart for so long. I've been feeling invisible for so long. Acknowledge that I could hardly hear myself, as if I were just living. But with you, I feel, he said, "Seen. You are seen," holding me steadily with his hands. "You deserve it." His comments struck me hard, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes because they covered so much more than just living. Tried to keep them at bay by blinking quickly, but one got away and landed on my cheek before I could remove it. Lucas bent over and planted a gentle kiss on the tears, highlighting the tenderness of this caused my breath to catch and my willpower to entirely collapse. "I'm not sure how to handle this." My voice wavered as I spoke, but I didn't want to stop. "We don't need to sort it out." With his forehead on mine, he whispered, "Let's just be here together." Everything was out right now. With a sense of grounding and anchoring that I hadn't experienced in years, I cautiously leaned in and opened my mouth. Brush across his in a tentative yet frantic kiss, as though I was worried the moment would pass. Lucas would have reacted right away if I hadn't gripped it firmly enough. He moved to my waist, and as he drew me in, the kiss grew deeper, and I felt my anxieties begin to fade. His motions were purposeful, and his touch was confident but cautious, as if he were scared of breaking me. He appeared to focus all of his energy on making me feel, which was intoxicating. Desired when his hands traced the contour of my body along my sides. I felt a surge of warmth that I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. It wasn't just physical, it was emotionally. It was the sense of being wanted and receiving care that went above and beyond. He whispered, "You're beautiful," in a low, respectful voice. I've always pondered, so his admission chilled me to the bone, and I recoiled. I couldn't take my eyes off him, even though the intensity of his stare was nearly unbearable. He obviously meant every word. I spoke, but there was hesitancy in his countenance. What could I say that I was afraid I had? The words became stuck in my throat. I felt unworthy of this kind of stress for so long that I was unable to deal with it now when it was in front of. He murmured softly, "You don't have to say anything," as his hands moved to cut my. He was honest in his voice, saying, "I just want you to know how I feel." My chest hurt, and I found myself purposefully leaning back into his touch. He exhaled softly as I approached, and I felt the firmness in his muscles as I ran my fingers up his arms. I leaned my forehead against his, my heart thumping against my ribs, and I confessed once more that I'm afraid. "My lips are quivering as I speak, but I don't want to stop, so we won't," he continued. Simply said, "I'll take care of you, Daniel," with assurance and steadiness. His sincerity and the care with which he pronounced my name made my knees weak, so I allowed him to lead me backward. His hands worked with such precision as he hovered over me, his body melting into the softness of the bed. Was exhilarating and reassuring, his touch stimulating each nerve ending as he explored, And then there was a pause that I think you won't even comprehend how incredible. He broke the pause by saying, "You are." And his words gave me a rush of feeling. And my eyes began to well up with tears once more after feeling I forgot to tell you that my voice was breaking, yet you made me feel important. "Do matter," he replied firmly, his hands motionless as he continued to stare into my eyes. Then you are aware of the genuineness in his eyes and the depth of his voice. I was so overcome with emotion that I reached up and cupped his face in my palms, believing him. Right and wrong didn't matter in that moment. What mattered was our connection and the way he made me feel. I murmured gently, "I feel like I'm worth something again. I'm not sure what's going to happen next." "I don't want this to stop, but it doesn't have to," he said, barely audible. I closed my eyes and stroked my hair tenderly, saying, "We'll figure it out together." For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of optimism as I let his words wash over me, thinking that perhaps I may once more find happiness. And as I laid in his embrace, I understood that no matter what obstacles, I was no longer alone. And the ensuing quiet wasn't uncomfortable. Rather, it was a cozy blanket that Lucas's hand was wrapped around us as we lay tangled on the bed. My head rested on his chest as he gently traced slow, calming circles on my back, causing a wave of serenity to wash over me. For a long time, the steady rise and fall of his breathing helped me stay grounded in the reality of what had just transpired. When we conversed, it seemed pointless and even invasive to me in our private time. Bond had been established between us. I closed my eyes and listened to his heartbeat beneath my ear, allowing it to serve as a reminder that the world beyond the room has vanished. Was just him, his warmth, his presence, and the way his touch restored my sense of wholeness. I said, hardly raising my voice above a whisper, "I don't want this to end." Lucas's hand froze for a moment, after which he pulled his armor further about me, drawing me nearer. "It doesn't have to," he said quietly. "If we don't." His words were comforting, but they were unable to stop the questions that were racing through my head about what this might entail for my marriage, for the delicate balance of our lives. I hadn't permitted myself to consider Luna in the heat of the moment, but now her presence hovered in the background of my thoughts like a shadow. Reminder of my decisions and the lines I've crossed. I'm afraid I acknowledged that my voice was shaking and that I wasn't sure how to return to normal after this. Lucas shifted. He propped himself up a little on one elbow to peer down at me, and his eyes were steady and full of a, "Don't be afraid," he whispered, with a compassion that made my chest hurt. "We'll work it out together." But how did I ask? A hair out of my face, my voice breaking under the strain of my doubts about how we can continue in this manner without. He gently interjected, saying, "Don't have all the answers right now. Let's just take it one step at a time." His composure was disarming, and in spite of the confusion in my head, I found myself nodding. There was something about the way he held me and looked at me that gave me hope that we might work things out, even if I couldn't see the way yet. And I murmured in a scarcely audible voice, "I don't deserve you," he said, his hand delicately grazing my cheek. "You deserve so much more than you think." His words, "I'm not going anywhere, Daniel, unless you want me to," shot a shock wave through relief through me, and my eyes began to well up with tears once more. I moved forward and gave him a gentle kiss, letting it express every feeling I was unable to express in words. I watched his car pull away down the road. The room still held his cologne's subtle aroma permeated the air, but it didn't do much to ease the nagging pain in my chest. When later that morning Luna came back, unaware of the storm that was building beneath the surface, and I found myself fighting to act normal. Her informal, I made myself smile as though I were seeing the events of someone else's life. answer her inquiries, but in the days that followed, I was preoccupied with a web of regret and desire. Couldn't get away from the memory of what Lucas and I had done. They were vivid and blazing against the background of my otherwise boring life. But the uncertainties, anxieties, and I couldn't stop wondering how we could possibly keep this up at night. Secret. And what sort of life would it be to live in the shadows even if we could? Lucas and I were able to sneak a few moments together here and there despite continuously watching over our shoulders. However, they were brief, full of hushed assurances and snatched touches, and the tension between us was, my heart pounded with equal parts excitement and trepidation whenever I saw him. And dread, one evening as I sat by myself, we were walking a tight RPP, and one mistake could bring all crashing down. Lucas emerged in the doorway of the living room, his face reserved but intent on the screen. Without saying a word, he crossed the room and sat next to me, his eyes revealing the anguish he was experiencing. Both reassuring and unnerving. "We must speak," he whispered softly, his voice calm in spite of the I nodded under the weight of his words, my throat constricted as I prepared for what was approaching, and I am aware that for a considerable amount of time, none of us said anything. Between us, burdened by all we were unable to express, Lucas finally broke the silence, his eyes on the ground. "I don't regret what happened," he said. "We can't continue this way. It's unfair to you and Luna." His comments, which were hardly audible above a whisper, struck me as a kick to the stomach, and I couldn't stop the tears that pricked my eyes. Lucas reached for my hand as I trembled and said, "I don't know how to let this go." "We must try his forceful yet delicate touch," he murmured quietly. "Since if we—" The truth of what he said was indisputable, but it didn't destroy us. I wanted to argue with him to convince him that we could make it simpler for them to hear. Work, that we could manage to be together without losing everything. But I felt in my heart that he was correct at the time. Grew into weeks, and gradually and painfully we started to separate. The snatched looks decreased. Rarer moments of connection were painful, like losing a piece of me. Away each time I saw him, and I had to act as though nothing had occurred. But it was essential for his sake and mine. The delicate equilibrium of our lives, Luna. Contentedly oblivious to the tempest that had raged beneath her home, and her habits and rituals stayed the same. They all remained the same in their distant adoration. But I couldn't look at her without feeling the burden of my guilt was choking me and serving as a continual reminder of treachery. Lucas was upset about the boundaries I had crossed and the pledges I had broken. I was impressed by his perseverance as he dedicated his days to networking and interviews in his job quest. "It was simpler this way," I said, even though it put us at a greater distance. "I find it easier to act as though we were just two individuals living together and handling life's challenges. However, the reality is that I missed him and the way he made me feel alive. Realized that I had missed our connection, the flame that had rekindled something within of me that I had assumed had long since died. Then, one night, as I lay awake, it seemed like I was losing a piece of myself, even though I knew it was for the best. I had an unbearable pang of longing as I was in bed, staring at the ceiling, and I thought of Lucas as he told me we had to let go. I realized how his touch had reminded me of the quiet strength in his voice, that a part of me would always carry him with me, regardless of how much time passed, and that our story's aftermath wasn't what I had envisioned. It was calm and gradual rather than dramatic or disastrous. Disintegration of something that had burnt too intensely to endure. But it was equally importantly, Lucas had transformed me and sparked an inner force that I couldn't ignore. And even though we had parted ways, as I lay there in the dark, I made a promise to myself that I would always remember the time we had spent together. I made a secret commitment to myself to use what I had learnt to find a way to go forward and pursue my happiness. It wouldn't be simple, but I had a duty to try for Lucas and myself, Therefore, I'm still not sure how I feel about all of this. What do you think? Am I mistaken? Have completed, kindly share your ideas in the comments section.